You listen to this podcast because you like books, or maybe because you like learning, or maybe you just like the sound of my voice lulling you to sleep. If it's the first two, Audible has you covered. Too busy to read? Driving and don't want to run into another dog? Audible is a huge library of audiobooks where people read to you like you're a kid again. And guess what? You can try it out for free. Just go to readlearnlivepodcast.com/audible to sign up for your free trial today.
There are so many other places where I felt inspired by what I saw, and it made me believe, it kept my belief of in Brooklyn alive. And I was like, I'm really glad that these places exist, that these people care for these places. And although it was not inspiration for the book, I thought it was inspiring in life in general. I thought that this was really great that people care about these places, and we are not the only weirdos to think that it's interesting.
Hello and welcome to Read, Learn, Live. I'm your acclaimed host, John Monaster, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 21, We're Old Enough to Drink. As a reminder, if you have ideas for books you'd like to see featured, or have authors you want to put me in touch with, you can reach me at jon@readlearnlivepodcast.com. Today, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with Augustin Pasquet and Michelle Young about their book, Secret Brooklyn, An Unusual Guide. Michelle Young is a graduate of Harvard College in the history of art and architecture and holds a master's degree in urban planning from Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, where she is an adjunct professor of architecture. She is the author of Secret Brooklyn, An Unusual Guide, New York, Hidden Bars and Restaurants, and Broadway. Michelle appears regularly as a guest speaker in documentaries, television, and at conferences on urban issues. She has traveled to over 40 countries and is always looking for the next adventure. Augustin Pasquet is from Paris, has lived in Nigeria, Switzerland, and Thailand, and recently fell in love with Brooklyn, where he lives now. He has a master's degree in marketing from ESSCA Business School in France and worked at L'Oréal in sales and marketing for 7 years. Augustin spends his off time traveling, taking pictures with his Canon 5D camera, or his rapidly increasing Lomo collection. He has traveled to 25 countries, including Cuba, Madagascar, and Bolivia. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Read, Learn, Live podcast. I'm your host, John Monaster, sitting here in lovely New York City with my guests for the day, Augustin Pasquet and Michelle Young. Say hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Awesome. I am super excited to talk with them about their work with Untapped Cities and their book, Secret Brooklyn, which is amazing. I went to the launch and saw them talk about it, and they had great stories, and I knew I had to have them on the podcast. So I'm super excited, and I always like to start off by asking one of you to summarize the book for us.
I guess that's fallen to me.
I saw that, that mic turn.
So Secret Brooklyn has a subtitle called An Unusual Guide. So Secret Brooklyn, An Unusual Guide. And it's really a guide, an insider's guide, written by people from Brooklyn. The whole series, the Secret book series, are all written by people that live in the various places that they take place.
Sure.
So, if it's Secret New York or Secret Dublin, the authors are all people that live there versus sort of this overarching large organization writing about places that they might not have been to.
It just sends people out maybe for a little bit.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I would also add that, to build on top of what you're saying, that it's a guide that's for residents more than for tourists. Of course, if you're a tourist and you want to go off the beaten path, that's a great guide for you. But if you're a resident and you've lived here all your life, that's also a guide for you.
Yeah, that sounds great. And that's what drew me to this book also, being a resident. And I live in Crown Heights, and I just found out you guys are my neighbors. So it's awesome that we're both living in Brooklyn, and now I can use this book to explore. So I want to get into the writing process a little bit before we talk about what's actually in the book. And so I always like to ask, why did you decide to write the book, essentially? Why did you decide now was the right time and you were going to focus on Brooklyn?
So we were living in Manhattan on the Upper West Side until late 2015, in which we bought a place in Crown Heights. And we had previously written a book for the same publisher called New York Hidden Bars and Restaurants. And we noticed that they had a secret New York overall guide with a few Brooklyn entries, but there wasn't anything specific to Brooklyn. And with Brooklyn being so hot globally, we pitched the idea that we would write Secret Brooklyn. And it was also a great opportunity for us to really jumpstart our exploration of the borough. We knew quite a lot about it from our work at Untapped Cities, but we went several times a week, to new places, brought our friends with us. So it was both like a career endeavor, but also a social endeavor.
Yeah. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. It's always great when you can combine those two things, work and fun. And I'm sure your friends appreciate it too, getting taken around all sorts of strange places.
Yeah.
So the next question I wanted to get into about the writing. So maybe something that while you were actually writing the book itself, was there something that surprised you that came out when you were putting words to paper? I know you did a lot of research for the book as well. There's a lot of historical information in there. Was there anything in particular you learned while you were writing that surprised you?
I'm going to have to flip through it.
Yeah. The answer can also be no. You can already have known everything.
No. For sure not.
I think to me it's more like as we were doing research on the places and as like many things, we could discover many things online, but when we went in person to these places, there was always more to the story. And so in Crown Heights, since you mentioned it, there is an old like abandoned tunnels below the brewery that's at the corner of Franklin and Bergen, and in the basement there the aged cheese. And so we knew about this, but going there and meeting with the people who actually run the place, you realize that it's like a whole new world that very comparable to like the world of like winemakers, or there's like
artisanal cheeses.
Artisanal cheeses, like how they were preparing some cheeses for like some competition, how they were comparing how it ages here versus Vermont, like the same cheese from like the same production, to see like how the aging process impacts like the taste, etc. And so I think going into these different places was really interesting because we discovered like so much more than what we could find online. And so that's probably what we discovered in the process of writing the book.
It's a good life lesson in general. Sometimes just get off the internet and show up.
Yeah.
I think similarly, all the characters we've met while doing this, sometimes planned because we had arranged beforehand who we were going to speak to, but sometimes it was completely random. And so I think the best example of that is when we went to photograph the remnants of a Park Slope plane crash in 1960. And we really thought we were there just to photograph the physical evidence, which include tops of buildings being reconstructed, et cetera. And as we were photographing on what we think is the coldest day of that winter, there was almost no one on the street except us.
Right.
And a guy walks by and says, "Do you know what you're photographing?" And we said, "Yes, we're photographing the Park Slope plane crash." And I think he was sort of impressed that we were doing this, and then paused and said, should I show them the piece de résistance?
Right. And you're like, yes.
Yeah. And so we then followed him into his apartment, knowing that something great was going to ensue. And he actually had pieces of the plane, and he's an artist, so he had collected them from an empty lot that used to be the church that was destroyed. And these pieces, I think, had been sitting there for probably almost a decade. So we got to talk to him about his experience and why he was collecting and what he's done with some of these pieces. And so I think some of the best moments we've had were serendipitous, and then combined with the people of Brooklyn really like opening their doors to us across many of these locations.
That's great. That's wonderful that happened. What a crazy story.
Yeah, and I had read actually that in the New York Times that one guy had a piece of the plane in his backyard. So when he showed up in the street, when it was like so cold and nobody was in the street, I was like, wait, could this be the
Yeah,
guy?
what are
And
the
so
odds?
I was
Yeah.
like, what are the odds? And then it ended up being him, which was like really, really fun. But yeah.
It is. Wow, so the Times knew about it. Somehow they were tipped off.
Yes, they had written about it like a long time ago, but I mean, there was like no information on who the guy was. So the
Right.
fact that we
Just
met
like
him
anonymous.
was completely like luck.
Yeah. There it is. Was there a particular moment of inspiration you guys had while you were putting the book together? Anything that was like an aha, like this is how it should be?
I think we had specific places that were sort of our must hits. And a lot of them were places that we weren't sure where we were going to get into. So I think we had this like dream list, and we kind of slowly picked at it, and then really persisted in some cases.
Yeah.
And I think we got everywhere that we wanted to, but some of them took more time than others.
And I think for the inspiration, to me, there's this idea that Brooklyn inspires me, like as a borough, and like places and people are, I think, inspiring. And while visiting these places, like I was mentioning the Cheese Cave earlier, but like there are so many other places where I felt inspired by what I saw, and like it made me believe, like it kept my belief of in Brooklyn like alive. And I was like, I'm really glad that these places exist, that these people care for these places. And although it was not inspiration for the book, I thought it was like inspiring, like in life in general. I thought that this was really great that people care about these places, and we are not like the only like weirdos to think that it's interesting. And so this was inspiring, although it's not inspiration directly related to the writing. It was very inspiring.
Yeah, it's sort of the idea that there's still hope. Like when it comes down to it, people still care. People want to put in effort, and you guys can find common ground from there. That's great. So yeah, we're kind of you were alluding to that as we were talking, Michelle, but how did you decide what to include or not? Because there was probably some stuff that obviously some stuff that you couldn't get to, then that's off. But there was some stuff maybe you could, but that you took out or whatever. How did you figure out the final list?
So we started with a larger list and, of course, got published. Sometimes we would get to a place and it no longer existed. Sometimes we would get to a place and it wasn't necessarily enough to talk about in the format that the book has. So the book has one page of a photograph, and the other side is one whole page of text. So it's a lot more than a normal kind of touristic guide where you might have a few sentences for
Go
each
check
location.
this out because it's cool.
Exactly. So you really needed a significant backstory. And so I think there were some cases where we got there and we're like, okay, either it's not hidden enough or there's not enough of a backstory, so we would take them out.
Okay. You had a process.
But
That was a shrug for those of you not watching.
for the original list, like when we were thinking, should that go into the book or not? The question that we really asked ourselves throughout the book and throughout the selection process was a bit what we talked about at the beginning, but if someone lived in this neighborhood like their whole life, is this place going to be surprising to them? So this is really what guided the original selection. And then when we get there, to Michelle's point, like sometimes we were disappointed or not, but the original idea was like, is it going to be surprising to someone who lived here their whole life?
That's a great rubric. I think that's a great way to measure any exploration, any ideas you have. I like that a lot. So in the book, you have Brooklyn kind of broken up into sections. And I thought that was interesting because I hadn't really seen Brooklyn split up the way you did it. So I feel like it's either original or you found a very hidden source for your geographic breakup. So how did that happen? How did you decide to split it up?
Yes, so I have to give credit here to the writer Hannah Frischberg from Brooklyn, a friend of mine. When we had to come up with the chapter titles, I definitely did struggle because it's not a guide in which we consciously made sure that every part of Brooklyn was covered, although we had this overall idea of the geography. But there were definitely some areas in which there were more entries and there were areas that there were fewer. So we couldn't break it up in the traditional neighborhood boundaries.
Yeah.
And so I decided to ask someone who has been writing about Brooklyn for a long time for her advice.
Yeah.
So she helped come up with this based on the maps that I had given her of the locations.
Cool.
And then we worked through some of the copy, but yeah,
No, it's really interesting.
much credit to her.
Yeah, that's great. It's good to have someone to help out, phone a friend. So the last question I want to ask about the process was, so that you're the first people I've interviewed that are co-writers. So you co-wrote this book. This was, you guys did a ton of work together on this. And so I want to know, how did you resolve the disagreements that came up? How did you work through that?
Yeah, so technically I did the writing and Augustin did the photography, but together we came up with the list of places that we wanted.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was probably not so much disagreements about the writing itself.
Because you took care of that.
Yeah.
No, I think the debates we had within us were probably between us was probably due around which places should we include or not. But the writing itself, was not a problem.
Okay, well, good.
Nor was the photo actually, but yeah.
Yeah, the photography was great, I heard, right?
Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, let's get into the book itself. And so I picked some things that I thought were interesting to ask questions about. And so there's an entry about old subway cars, and there's a transit museum. And so you wrote this subheader that read Nostalgia Underground, which I thought was really interesting. And so I just thought it would be great to hear you talk about the transit museum and why you thought people might be nostalgic for subway cars, especially ones that they probably never rode in.
Yeah, so I think the Transit Museum is a great example of how we angled a location that might be known to people in the neighborhood. But I noticed when I was visiting, people saying, "Oh, I didn't even know that this lower level existed, and I've been here X number of times." So the entry focuses on this lower level of the Transit Museum, which is full of 2 tracks of vintage train cars. And they really cover almost all, I think, the periods of the New York City subway system, including specialty cars like the money train that collected the money and the tokens, and then a special train that went to, I think, the Mets stadium that had the colors
like
of
an
the
express,
Mets painted.
Yeah.
And I think people are just in general first fascinated and obsessed with transportation because it's something that impacts everyone. And then secondly, they just love seeing how people traveled in the past and how it's evolved since then. And I think there's a sense of always wondering, was it better back then or is it better now?
Right. Especially because the subway system seemingly has been unchanged for quite some time.
And I think some of the amenities back then people really like because there seemed to be a real attention to detail, which was probably changed because it's not as efficient for cleaning, but the wicker seats, the wooden fans, and then of course down there all the trains have vintage ads. So they really give a sense of what it might have been like to ride these trains in that time period.
In some train cars, you can also see like a little shelf where gentlemen and ladies could put their hats. So that's really like old school. And so these are like some fun touch that you don't really see in today's cars.
Yeah,
so,
you wouldn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So your point, Michelle, was more that maybe people are nostalgic for the past more generally, and the transit part is because it affects everyone's lives. So that's maybe what they would be.
I think so.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, because I think a lot of people today are just complaining, right, about the subway. Like it's just a source of frustration for them. So maybe they can idealize, in the past it was so nice, and I could put my hat on the subway. It was so convenient.
Yeah, and I think if we think even all the way back to when the first subway line was launched, there was such an excitement.
Right.
And like a real spectacle that accompanied the first subway car that took off from City Hall. One of the things, it's not in this book because it's not in Brooklyn, but the guy who financed the first subway line had his own private subway car that he was able to run along the subway lines and could connect it to like the East Coast trains.
That's amazing.
For those who are interested, this car is actually in the Connecticut Trolley Museum, and it's possible to visit it, and it's spectacular. You have like an office, a mini kitchen. You have like match strikers for his cigars on the wall. It's like it's a very cool.
Spared no expense.
A very special place. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was at the book launch, you guys had Rooftop Reds wine, and Rooftop Reds is the first commercial rooftop vineyard. And so I was just curious about what they're up to and why you think that was important for the future of urban agriculture.
Yeah, I think so. It's the world's first rooftop vineyard, like commercially viable rooftop vineyard. And to us, it's important because at Untapped Cities, we try to help people see their cities differently.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very interested in the different experiments that people make on a large scale on how they can reuse buildings or use like unused spaces. And rooftops are very often are not very used in New York City. You would have like you often have like mechanical rooftops with like AC units, or sometimes you have a place for like residents. But if we think of the food we eat and the wine we drink, we have to import this from other places in the United States, in the world. But if we can have like locally grown fruits, vegetables, and tomorrow wine, that's pretty remarkable because we cut on like the supply chain. It's like it reduces the impact on the environment. It contributes to like cool off the cities, so less use of AC. So it really has an impact that is much greater than what it may seem at first. And so if this works here, it also means that we could potentially have like wines in many more rooftops. And
there are rooftops everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when Elon Musk like launched, like announced like the Powerwall, he showed this little dot on the map of the US that said basically if we were to power like the entire US, like this is the amount of like solar that it would take, and this would be like unused spaces. And so it's barely anything. And I'm pretty sure that for food is the same thing, because just next to Rooftop Reds is Brooklyn Grange, and they're also like producing like a lot of fruits and vegetables over there. And it's a different way to use the unused space in the city. So I think it's important.
Yeah.
And also like because you've never seen this anywhere else, when you arrive there, it's just like you're like, wow, that's so cool. Like you see like vines growing.
Yeah,
and
the
it's
novelty
just it's very exciting actually. Yeah.
Yeah, that is exciting. It's sort of maybe something that we can, like a future we can be excited about that's not 100% focused on like the next phone or some like technology item, right? It's like something else. So
exactly.
I like that.
And maybe like 200 years from now we'll look back on this saying, remember like this first like vineyard, but like now like every city has one, or
right.
And it's exciting to feel like this may be the beginning of something, and that you can go there and see it for yourself.
Yeah. Everyone likes to be at the beginning, just like what you were saying about the launch of the subway. Like being able to say, I was there when it started, that's the story you want to tell your kids. So in the entry for the robotic church, you wrote, in an era where popular technology is pushing ever towards virtual reality, Amorphic Robotic Works uses analog technology to explore the human condition. Instead of getting sucked into a digital world, the kinetic sculptures remind us of what it means to be alive. So I particularly love that passage, and I thought the Amorphic Robotic Works in general was really cool. So maybe talk about that place and what you meant when you wrote how its sculptures remind us of what it means to be alive.
So this was one of the most special places we went to. So first, it's located in a former Norwegian seamen's church in Red Hook. New York used to be dotted with churches for seagoers of all different countries. And it's been repurposed by an artist who runs this place called Amorphic Robotic Works. And so there, it's a workshop studio, but also a performance space. So the main space of what was the church is now set up for performances of these robots. And what he's done is create a coordinated performance that he can control from a booth. And each robot has like a specific task that they need to accomplish. So one of them needs to climb from the ground floor to the top of the church, as an example. And I think it was just very refreshing to see artwork that was really getting to the core of things, of how things work. And I would say it's a very theoretical piece, a theoretical exploration. And so this sense of being alive is connected to the fact that we are like imbuing materials and objects with human-like behaviors. And some of the artist's other works use robotics or inflatables to explore other things about the human condition. So one of the projects for which he won a Guggenheim Fellowship for is using inflatables that reach over the Mexican border. And so they're on one side, but they can like kind of stretch a tentacle over. And so I really loved also that though his work is quite theoretical, that one was really rooted in issues that are affecting us today.
Yeah.
And I think earlier we were talking about inspiration. This is clearly one place where after we left the place, I was like, wow, I'm really glad this place exists. I'm really glad this type of projects are still going on in New York, in Brooklyn. This is inspiring. It is not purely driven by the forces of money or real estate. It is pure art. And having, like, we spent like a few hours there, maybe like 1 or 2 hours, I don't know, there in the space. And having the artist to walk us through his process was really something very, very special. And what I also liked about this place is that from the outside, you have no idea what's going on inside. It looks like a church that's like not abandoned, but clearly maybe not used like every Sunday. And so it's a very unassuming facade. And it's also what we do at Untapped, where we try to see things differently. And maybe I often say that at Untapped and on this book, we try to unearth places that are doing interesting things, and you may be walking by every day without knowing that actually behind these walls are these crazy things happening, and this is a very good example.
Prime example. Yeah. It's really fascinating. I mean, it's interesting, that point you made about, Michelle, about when we ascribe sort of human ideas to things, because I think we do that a lot. You know, it's like when people name their cars or whatever, like we do that a lot. So it's interesting that that's kind of where they came from. But I'm trying to picture what you're describing, and it sounds like something like totally just like amazing and different, you know? So from what I remember from the entry, it's a bit difficult to actually see though. So like what's the trick there? And this comes up in a lot of them. It's sort of tricky to get to. So what's the trick there?
So the artist has a Facebook page for Amorphic Robot Works, and there they post when these performances are taking place. I would say that it's not on a regular schedule, so you kind of have to just
pay attention.
Yeah. And I guess it depends on the priorities of what's going on in that workshop at that given time. But yeah, this one is definitely a little more difficult. And to see it, there wasn't a performance going on around when we were writing it, so we specifically wrote them and asked if we could come visit.
I would say 95% of the places in this book are accessible, but to Michelle's point, they may not be accessible like every day from 9 to 5. Maybe it's only like 4 times a year at the lowest, or more often, or just like appointments only. But you can go see all these places yourself.
You just have to plan.
Yes, you have to plan, and since you're likely a resident, you'll be around when this place will open.
Yes, so. Key. But good point. Yes, these are accessible. You can do these things. So I mean, but that's kind of interesting though, the idea that they're doing these incredible things, but it's not always available to see. I mean, that to me, that almost speaks of like that they're trying to, that they want it for themselves to some degree, right? Or I mean, maybe it would just be too logistically, financially difficult to have people coming and going, whatever. But I wonder if since so many of these places are a bit more difficult to get to, you can't just walk in most of the time. Do you feel like that's why they're Secret Brooklyn? You know, it's like it's because they're a little bit more difficult and they take an extra step that a lot of people aren't going to take. And is that I don't know, is that fair, you know, for a lot of this?
Well, I think with the example of the robotic church, it's really this guy's workshop, and occasionally it's opened up. So I think I understand in that sense. The main goal is not as like a public-facing theater or anything like that. It's really about the creation of the art and a location to do that.
Yeah.
It depends what you're interested in. Most of these places are probably a little less mainstream, but it doesn't mean that they're not interesting, but they're probably open to the public in a way that's like proportional to like the interest that's out there.
Perhaps. So you're trying to revive. This is a chicken and egg problem, then, right? 'Cause now you're trying to revive it.
That's
so
correct.
you
Yeah.
sell 1,000 copies of the book, and everyone wants to go check these places out. They better start opening up.
I hope they will.
This is the trick. Well, because I remember the what was it? I think it was a story you told at the launch, the Veterans Museum or whatever. Like how difficult it was to get in there.
Actually, yeah. Actually, the
Was it
Veterans Museum was fairly easy to get to. It was
Okay.
just like by appointment.
Okay.
But the one that was very hard was the Puppet Museum, where I
Mm.
went with my mom. Is it the
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
one-
Okay. Right. Was this the one at the?
At the Brooklyn College.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good story. Why don't you tell
Yeah.
tell the Puppet Museum story?
The Puppet Library.
Puppet
sorry.
Library.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. So there's a puppet library which we discovered originally because it used to be stored inside the Grand Army Plaza arch. And so I was like, wow, this is so cool. I didn't know that we can enter the arch, and that's really great. But then the roof of the arch started leaking, so they had to move the puppets to the Brooklyn College.
And what kind of puppets are these?
They're like giant puppets.
Yeah.
Like way, I don't know, like
40, 50 feet tall.
40, 50 feet tall. Yeah, they're really like big puppets.
Okay.
And so they are either of like animals or there's like a Barack Obama puppet. And so anyway, we went in Brooklyn College and they have like no website, no phone number. So we reached out to another puppet group in Brooklyn College called Puppetry in Practice. And they told us where the puppet library was, and so we went there, but it was closed, and because it's only open during class year, and
Yeah, it's stored in a location where they run after-school activities.
Mhm.
So it's only open during the school year
Sure.
and not the summer. And the puppets are located on the second level bleacher of this gymnasium. So it creates this kind of really interesting juxtaposed scene of
Yeah.
people playing sports and doing other activities, and then above them are 50-foot puppets,
It's menacing
like
down
looking
on
down.
them. Yeah.
And to note that these type of puppets are usually used for parades. So, for example,
Mhm.
Greenwich Village Halloween Parade. And it's a lending library, which is why it really doesn't have a public website or phone number, because it's really people that are involved in this industry that need to know about how to access these puppets, and those people know.
Just like you have to be able to use the puppets before you can get access to them. I presume I can't just walk in and know how to operate a 40-foot
That's correct.
puppet.
and so the day I finally was able to enter the puppet library, I was with my mom, and like my mom is like this 70 years old, 65 years old, like oops, I hope she doesn't hear this. Like
Whatever age she
full,
is.
full white hair woman, like she really doesn't look like she doesn't look like a threat at all. And so it was super hard to access the place because the person running the after school program would not let us go see the puppets. And so we were like, hey, I'm just here with my mom, I just want to go see the puppets, please let me in. And it was incredibly challenging, but in the end it worked. It took like some negotiation, but it worked.
Okay, so now we have our lesson there. Bring your parents. Yeah, that's so crazy. So yeah, the last couple places kind of lead me to my next question, which is about the idea of mystery. And we kind of talked about this earlier, but it was clear that sometimes you really wanted to keep some information off the printed page. You wanted people to really take that extra step of finding out for themselves. And it may have been either because you thought it best or the person requested it. So I want to mention the tour of the wild parrots specifically because written in the entry for the wild parrots, it specifically says, we're not telling you. You know, it's like, you just have to go. Just like call, schedule it. It's a secret. And so maybe talk about the parrot tour, because I thought the story was interesting, the history, and then more broadly about how you balanced your desire to share versus trying to keep some information a secret still.
Yeah, so the tour of the wild parrots is another one of my favorite experiences that I went on. This guy runs a monthly parrot safari tour in all different locations. The ones that are publicly known are in Greenwood Cemetery, but there's one somewhere in Flatbush, and it's on a residential street, and I think keeping it secret is a combination of not wanting people to actually take the parrots or remove their nests, which could be very reachable compared to something like Greenwood Cemetery, where they're very high up in the architecture. And I think that's the main reason for not disclosing it. But also, since it is a residential location, I don't think they want people constantly
Camping
showing
out,
up and camping out. But it's pretty amazing. I mean, when you finally get to the street on this tour and you look up and you realize there are nests everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, tell the history. I mean, I thought it was fascinating.
Oh yeah. So there are these monk parrots that live in Brooklyn, and the story goes that they arrived from Argentina in crates to JFK Airport. One of the reasons they were coming here was that there were too many in Argentina, and the government had tried to eradicate them through a system of paying farmers to kill them. And then that soon became ripe with corruption. People were just sending in like legs of other birds, hoping to be paid for killing these specific parrots. And so they realized that a lot of people outside of Argentina really love to collect exotic birds and buy them as pets. And so they started an export business, shipping these pets abroad. And so they would come in through JFK Airport, and this was the era of high mafia activity in the New York ports.
So when was this about?
I believe it's the 70s, but
okay.
Yeah. And so it was regular practice for some of the people that worked here that they would open one of the crates and take whatever was in there. It was sort of just an agreed upon system.
Yeah.
So the story goes that they opened a crate and out flew
all of the parrots.
all these parrots. And then they took up residence kind of all over Brooklyn, and I think all the way out in some cases to Long Island. And there are probably other cases where they escaped from homes and from pet stores, but the main story is about them coming from the crates at JFK.
Yeah, and it's interesting then to hear you say they ended up all over the island. They're kind of went all over the place, because now it seems like they've got two sort of neighborhoods where they hang out in. So it's a funny thought. At one point they were just like flying for their lives all over the place, and somehow they all coalesced and came back together. And now
well,
they're in these two
I think
spots.
there are other locations that we just didn't mention.
Okay, more secrets.
I think they're easiest to see in Greenwood and in this place in Flatbush, and I think there's one other location actually now that he does tours of. But yeah, I think it's about.
So they're dispersed. Okay.
Yeah.
So I really like the thought of the Japanese house and the picture. So nice job, photographer. But it really seemed like a great example people are unlikely to have heard about, right? Because it's sort of really tucked away in a far south neighborhood in Brooklyn. You're not just going to wander by it. I've never heard of it. So just maybe talk about what the house is all about and how you guys found out about it.
Yes, I think we had an article. Yes, we had an article a few years back where one of our writers wrote about this Japanese house. So we decided to dig a little deeper. Occasionally they give tours. It's still privately owned. But the backstory of it is we kind of have to go back to like the late 19th century, turn of the century, following the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, in which really America was introduced to a lot of Asian art and some of the countries for the first time, and really among the wealthy elite, what they used to call Orientalism, which is not a term that we like to use anymore, but it really took the country by storm in this social class. So a lot of people were decorating their rooms with the Japanese room, importing things from art like vases and all sorts of things from Asia. So this house was a real estate endeavor in the early 1900s. And it was built as a speculative property, I think in the hopes that actually it would take off and there would be lots more of these houses. And so in the end, it didn't really take off. So it's now the only house, but it really sits amongst an area that is full of Victorian mansions and single family homes. And that in itself is actually very surprising, because I think most people, when they think of Brooklyn, they might think downtown Brooklyn, they might think Williamsburg. They still think of a pretty dense street grid.
Yeah.
And there, that whole area was laid out as more of a suburban style. A lot of the streets are named after English places. And so this is one of the houses there. And so it stands out now because it's not Victorian in style, and is the only one, but it's fascinating. And inside is also decorated in a Japanese style.
It's a good example of a place so that you can enjoy from the outside, from the street, but I also believe that the person who lives in there does tours several times a year for some organizations. So it's also, if you're patient enough and are there, you can also get to see what it looks like inside.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that you mentioned that the inside is decorated in that certain style, because it also probably then is almost like a time capsule or a historical museum of some sort, right? Because the way that modern or Asian designers are designing homes right now, and the interior of homes right now, is probably not at all what it looks like in there. So it's also divorced from our world, and maybe it goes back to this whole nostalgia thing that we brought up earlier.
You're right. I think it's probably actually very divorced from most things, from current time period, from an actual Asian house.
Yeah.
It's very specific to maybe a few decades of interior design in America.
Yeah, what they thought was the new trend, or what they thought people
Exactly.
would want, or what they were trying to get people to want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, on my list. Actually, everything's on the list, but I don't know. Actually, that'd actually be pretty fun, right? To like get friends and say, okay, we have 1 year. Can we knock off everything on in the book?
It's similar to writing a book, having that list. And
yeah, same idea.
So what we did is we created like a Facebook group, and so we would post. It was called like Brooklyn Exploration or something. And so every Saturday we would say in which neighborhood we were going to explore, and invite all our friends to join. And so some joined like several times, and so it was really it was a fun endeavor.
It sounds great. So I mean, talking about just wandering around neighborhoods, one of the things I really liked about the book is how it made you rethink everyday places. So there are some places, like we were talking about the Japanese house. Most of us might not live in that neighborhood. It's not very dense, so we might not just walk around it. But there are lots of places in the book that are just neighborhoods, and where people live, and lots of people live, and they're probably walking around, and they might not know what's actually happening. And so I really liked the Headquarters of Murder Inc. entry for that reason, because there's all this stuff that happened, and now it's just a bodega. It's just like a random little shop, and you might never know, and it's like I wonder about how many stories there are like that in all these shops, maybe even just in all the bodegas, who knows, but in all these shops all over the place. So yeah, tell us about Murder Inc.
I'm really glad you brought up this particular entry, because I had a real debate with our publisher, and I fought to include this one. Good.
I'm glad.
So the Headquarters of Murder Inc. are in a bodega in East New York.
Mm-hmm.
And Murder Inc. was one of the most notorious gangster mob crews in New York. I think in the book we mention that the hitmen of Murder Inc. have carried out anywhere between 400 to 1,000 contract killings, with their favorite method was using an ice pick.
Wow.
So in this bodega used to be what was called the Midnight Rose Candy Store, and it was a 24-hour coffee candy shop.
That's the most suspicious name, can I say, for a place, a 24-hour shop named Midnight Rose. I feel like you're already in trouble.
Right, and there were apparently a row of telephones in the back, and this syndicate would use the telephones to coordinate the hits. So the hitmen would wait in the candy store for a phone to ring, and then they would be given instructions on where to go and who they were going to kill. And it said that the owner, Rosie Gold, knew about everything that was going on, and she sort of got some kickback by allowing this to happen in her store.
Yeah, so that's crazy. I mean, wow, right? I think that's really interesting, but you brought something up. I mean, why did you have to fight for it?
It's a place that no longer looks very interesting. There were photos we couldn't use that showed what the place looked like way back as a candy store. Now it really looks like any ordinary bodega. The building is very simple. and so I think some of the feedback was like that it just wasn't very interesting. But I think the story is fascinating, and
Yeah.
if you were to go there, then and you had this book, you would then see like get some color about what this neighborhood used to be like. And East New York actually is a focus of a lot of attention for New York City right now. It's
Yeah.
a prime redevelopment area. There was some controversy earlier as they were figuring out the rezoning of it, and I
Mhm.
think we're going to see a lot of news about East New York in the next 5 years. So that was another reason I really wanted to make sure that it was included, even though it's very far away. It's really in deep Brooklyn,
Yeah.
but
For the true explorer.
exactly,
Not it's not it's
exactly.
not an easy one you can just get to. Yeah, and that's so interesting though that you got that feedback, because to me that's exactly what made it interesting. Like I brought up, like the fact that it looks so ordinary, but is not. It has this, it literally has blood on its hands. So, yeah, that's great that you discovered that sort of thing. So tell us the story behind the pacifier tree.
So the pacifier tree is, as we described it in the book, a neighborhood rite of passage. It's located in the neighborhood of Borough Park on 48th Street, and it's a tree full of pacifiers. And basically, all the kids from the neighborhood, when they grow out of their pacifiers,
Mhm.
come to attach it on this little tree. So it's it's also a little like I don't know. It's like a quirky, fun thing that you might not see. It actually took us quite a while to look at the exact tree, because unlike what we may think, pacifiers are not that easy to
It's a spot
to
from
to
far
spot.
away.
Yeah.
You bring your binoculars,
Yeah.
you're
So we
searching.
were like driving in the neighborhood for like quite a while and like looking at all the trees, and suddenly we see one. I'm like, oh wait, we think that's it. And so there was also an interesting one.
Another one of my favorite spots is Golden Gate Fancy Fruits grocery store, which
Ah.
is in Marine Park. And this is a place that looks like it's from 1939. And in fact, that is exactly what the owner said to me when I walked in. You just stepped
Yeah.
into 1939. And his name is John Cortez, and he really inherited this grocery store from his father, who opened it
Mhm.
and has been working there since he was a kid. He's a World War II veteran. He's got one of the sharpest minds we've ever encountered. His memory is impeccable. He can
Yeah.
remember the model numbers of the equipment that he used in World War II to demine northern France, and all the towns that they liberated and walked through. He remembered all the names.
Wow.
But the grocery store is a real trip. It has wooden floors that are creaky, a tin ceiling. He weighs everything through those the old weights where it would hang, and it
Mhm.
would be a little basket.
Yeah.
In the back room, there is a wood cold storage and an old stove, potbelly stove. And he's probably around 93 at this point. And he really does it to have something to do. He has a neighbor who runs a shop down the street, and they have breakfast every morning. It really was just a real honor to meet him and have him tell
Mhm.
us his life story, and to be in this space. So that was one of my favorites.
Another place I really liked is the Newtown Creek digester eggs. These are like these futuristic looking huge eggs in Greenpoint. And so they have, we went there for Valentine's Day, and so it's like their annual tour of like the digester, like Valentine's Day digester egg tour. And
Sounds
so,
romantic.
yeah, it's very romantic, and you can tell that like everybody who was there was like weirdly excited by the
Yeah.
by the moment. And so it's a futuristic sewage treatment plant with two honors for excellence in design. And actually, when you look at them at night, they are lit in purple or blue, and it's like very, very it's very cool looking. And when you take a tour of the facility, it's led by the head of the facility, who explains like how the whole place works, which is fascinating. And you also get to go at the very top of the digester eggs, and from there you get like an amazing view of Greenpoint, Newtown Creek, and the whole area. So it's the best Valentine date possible.
Take note.
And the last space I want to talk about is fun for both location and the process of how we got the photograph. So inside Long Island University, one of the buildings used to be a movie theater, one of those old grand movie theaters of the heyday of cinema.
Yeah.
And it's been converted into a basketball court. And so there are these kind of epic famous photographs by these French photographers that we had seen of this like basketball team playing under like this amazing decorative stage. And we knew this had to be in the book, but getting there was very difficult. So we always tried to contact, but oftentimes some places don't respond. So I showed up one day and I look kind of like a student. So they allowed me in past the gates.
Wait, was this on purpose? Like you dressed the part?
No, I mean, I think
Or you just
generally I
think
look
you are?
younger.
Okay.
I
you
probably
brought
had
like a
a backpack
backpack. Yeah,
anyway
okay,
with
see?
my camera.
Sneaky.
So we walked in there. I walked in there, walked around the campus, and then I had a vague idea. I knew where the building was, and there was actually a door open into like pitch blackness. So I was like, I'll just walk in here. And I realized that I was standing inside the theater, but it was completely dark. So I walked out of the theater basketball court. And there is a part of this building that was originally the main lobby of this movie theater. And so now they host events there. So there was actually a wedding that was being set up, and there were like 3 guys in the wedding party, and they were already drunk. And so they were like, "Hey, what are you up to?" They were trying to offer me drinks. They tried to like do a little dance with me, and then I said, "Well, I'm here because I'm trying to photograph the basketball court / theater, but the lights are off. Is there any way, like, who are you working with here
Yeah.
for this event that maybe I could talk to?" So they send me out to the security guards, and the security guards are like, "How did you get in here?" They were not amused.
Yeah.
So they sent down their head security guard. So I had to explain, well, I'm doing a project about old theaters in New York, and like I want to photograph. And so they gave me some generic answer about how they host events, and I should look at the calendar. But then as I was leaving, someone from the administration pulled me aside a little bit and said, you should come on a campus tour because then you'll be able to see it. And so then at this point I sent Augustin to go on a campus tour where he pretended to be a student interested in photography.
Awesome.
In order to get the shot that we needed.
So sneaky. That's great. That's next level. Okay. That's a good story. So is there, I like to make the podcast focus a bit on learning and trying to draw some lessons. Is there anything that you hoped people might take away at a high level from the book?
For me, it's just that wherever you live, there's like an endless amount of things to discover. And I think that's aligned with our mission at Untapped Cities as well, is that no matter how much you think you know about a place or a subject, there's more if you just kind of like turn your mindset slightly, 90 degrees, let's say,
Yeah.
and you'll uncover a lot of stuff. So for me, that's the importance of the work we do at Untapped, but also with this book.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I will also add that we are completely sucked into technology today on our phones. But if we just make it a point to go out, explore, drop our phones, talk to people, look at things that we usually overlook, whether it's a building, just a train car, anything. And if we talk to people, we actually get to discover a lot of places. Like half of these places we were able to get access to just because we spoke to the right person and we explained what we were here for. And so yeah, the lesson for me is let's try to spend a little less time on our phones and more time outside. I think you brought earlier the idea of making it like a goal to go to all these places in like a year, but like, yeah, that's exactly it. Like how about you say with your friends, hey, let's meet up and let's hit like these 5 places today, and as you'll be discovering these places, I'm sure you'll see even more places that we have not included in the book. So
Yeah.
it's just switching mindset.
Yeah, I think that's great. I totally agree. So And we've mentioned Untapped Cities now several times. So maybe talk about Untapped Cities and what you guys are up to.
So Untapped Cities is the company that Augustin and I run together. It is half online magazine where we talk about quirky things that will surprise you every day that you come on the website. And then we also run tours for New Yorkers to rediscover their cities. So we'll bring people to the places we talk about and we publish about.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is that we think of ourselves as being in the business of discovery. So if you want to discover something in New York, you can do it from the comfort of your couch by reading an article about, let's say, the secrets of Grand Central Terminal, or you can discover these secrets by coming in person with us. And so it's really a discovery. The discovery is the way you want it for the curious mind.
Aha. Hopefully all of us. So you used it's Untapped Cities, plural. Is there another city? More cities?
We do cover content from other cities. These days we focus mostly on New York, but we are working on our expansion on the tours end to many other cities in the U.S.
Oh, exciting.
Soon.
Anything you can tell us?
The West Coast.
The West Coast, where I'm from, Los Angeles.
Oh yes, we
Well,
love LA.
actually, Los Angeles.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that's where I'm from,
If
so
you
I
have
will
any-
tell you.
yeah.
Yeah, I got lots of tips for you. So
Great.
awesome. So cool. Let's move on to the Thunder Round. I'm just going to ask you guys some like fun, silly questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Sound good?
Yes.
Yay. All right. So either of you or both can answer these guys. What's your favorite food or drink?
Favorite food is definitely chocolate, and the reason for that is that when I was young, I was allergic to milk, and I was told by my parents that I was allergic to chocolate as a result. And I discovered at around age 21 that there's something called dark chocolate
With no milk.
with no milk.
Wow. Life
And
changing.
so I think I've been making up for lost time ever
That's
since.
a great reason. At the beginning, I was going to stop you and say, you don't have to justify it, but that actually makes perfect sense.
And I'm going to be very French and say that my favorite drink is red wine.
Okay, great. Do you have anything in particular? What do you recommend? Someone's going to go out and get a bottle tonight.
I love Pomerol within the Bordeaux region.
Okay.
Usually any wines from there are pretty good.
Sounds
Yeah.
fancy. Good. What about places? I love to travel. Where's your favorite place you've ever been?
So I have a very soft spot for the country of Bolivia.
Okay.
One of the reasons is that Augustin and I met there on a backpacking trip
Ooh.
in the town of Santa Cruz. But I was also sent there when I worked as a merchandiser for Abercrombie and Fitch right after college. There were a few factories that we ran out, or we were our suppliers down there. So I was sent to figure out some supply chain stuff that was going on. And it was really a city that, and a layout of a city that I had never seen before. So it's a South American city, but built really into a place that looks like a crater. And so basically the city grew from the very bottom all the way up around its edges and spilled over.
Oh, that is interesting.
And later I study it in planning school and analyze why the layout of this particular city enabled them to overthrow a few governments in the mid-2000s. And I also discovered that I was there right in between two government overthrows. I
Wow.
just didn't realize it until
Yeah.
later. So to me, like, there was this, I just felt that there was something different about this city, and then later I got to really research it. And then really just the pace of activity in South America in these cities is just really, really exciting. The number of buses and, it's a little less planned and organized than here, and there's just such a nice contrast when you visit these places.
Yeah, sometimes that can be fun.
One of the countries I've been to that I really like is Cuba, and actually mostly, so partially because it's like frozen in time. You see like these old cars,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
all these like postcards images that I had before to go there, but also because the people were absolutely amazing. They were much more. They were speaking much more freely than what I was expecting about the conditions of life there, and this is something that surprised me. They were very open to talking about the challenges that they're facing, and extremely welcoming. So I would, that's a very special place.
Sounds-
to go there before
Yes, I went there. I forgot, maybe like 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Yeah.
A while ago. So both of you have to answer this question, mandatory. If you could wave a magic wand and change any one thing, what would it be and why?
I'm not going to go full political on this, but I do wish that we were in a time where we really could take a step back and really appreciate the diversity that's available in this country, and to really learn from all the different people and places and things that exist here. I think we do this every day in our work, and we constantly meet interesting people who are passionate about different projects. And then I read the news and I feel disheartened that in some ways things are going into silos, and we're having right now a hard time creating avenues of communication. So I have hope that this will pass, and we can kind of continue this mission of discovery that I feel is really the path for the future, globally as well. But yeah.
Okay.
All right. So mine is very unrealistic, but I guess that's fine.
Yes.
I would do like a mandatory, like I would, if I was the US government, for example, I would do like a mandatory 1 year travel around the world for all my citizens to make sure that they can see the diversity that you're mentioning, Michelle, but like the diversity of countries, cultures that are out there, and that are not in America, because I think we would all win from this. Yeah.
And as a fun one, I would say that I wish I would not be allergic to cats, because it's really my spirit animal. We had a kitten that was so adorable that we rescued, and then we had to give it away to another couple because I just literally couldn't breathe.
Yeah. So hypoallergenic.
Yeah, but it's like so disheartening to me that I'm like, I feel at one with these animals, but then I'm like deathly allergic to them. It just doesn't make sense.
There's some sort of lesson or something in there. I'm not sure what that means. Yeah. Our desire for things we can't have.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Continued.
All right. I wish you the best of luck. Maybe they'll come up with a pill for that at some point. All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Michelle and Augustin, for joining me with their discussion about their wonderful book, Secret Brooklyn, An Unusual Guide, and their great company, Untapped Cities. You should read the book, go on one of their tours. And I'm John Manasser. This is Read and Learn Live. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Read, Learn, Live. If you liked it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. If you hated it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. And so it goes.